Now 4:30, the time for the work session on the rezone issue. So we will begin. I'll turn it over to the city manager and start the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I am going to turn it over to Linda, who will kick things off.
Everybody's passing the buck.
Thank you. So I'm Linda Mitchell, Economic Development and Planning Director. And so this work session, just to refresh everyone's memory, is to address, well, to cover two ordinances that are pending legislations. And at the last meeting that we had with City Council was back in September, and your council had asked to staff to come back and address some outstanding concerns, some of it being some questions regarding long-term tax revenue, so non-conforming status of established businesses, the need for more public feedback, and the practical feasibility of the proposed development standards, which may include the land use table, the parking requirement, and the general standards. So staff has compiled a presentation for you to go over these things, and I'm going to actually kick it off with Cassidy Cameron with KPED to talk about the revenue and the economic development aspect of this. So thank you, Cassidy, for being here.
All right. Thank you guys for inviting me and having me. Good to see you all and happy winter. So as you know, Kenai Peninsula Economic Development District, we are looking at how our region is ticking and what are the factors that are influencing the ebbs and flows of our economy and also of our quality of living. They go hand in hand, and we want to make sure that if we have, if we have high quality of living standards and are meeting the needs of our communities, hopefully the economy will boom. Build it, they will come. So when we're looking at an economic perspective for high density mixed use development, the Riverfront redevelopment really does stand out as a prime example of how high density mixed use development could be very beneficial and very positive for this particular community. Next slide, please. Or do I have the clicker? Okay. One, there we go. So as with anything, we look at all projects, all of our lands. Oops, one more back. There we go. Sorry. Okay, now we're on the same page. So what I've done to prepare today is look at where Soldotna stands today. You guys do have moderate growth in terms of population and also tax base. Total jobs, you're right around 1,800. The healthcare sector is one of your largest employers, with retail heading up a large percentage of that. White collar is your largest percentage of the sector, as well as blue collar is significant in your total job makeup. We're looking at commute time. So average commute time is almost 13 minutes, and that's average. I know that, you know, we're all, it's kind of a flex in terms of where people are coming from in order to come to work or to go to the grocery store or commute. They're driving alone 83% of the time. Public transport, we all know, is very low or limited here. And then people that walk or bike or take taxis or some other services is less than 3% combined. We're looking at the household income, the median home value, and then also the home ownership, which is 58%. So when we look at all of these factors, when looking at how to encourage successful development and something that will work for a region, we look at just how healthy is your economy, how much is it growing, how much is the potential there. And while we're looking at this, we take into consideration developments like the Riverfront redevelopment. Next slide, please. While we also do look at the nuts and bolts of a community, we're really looking at everything through our SEDS, our comprehensive economic development strategy, and what that alignment is. When we're looking at the redevelopment project, which we have been kind of participating and engaging in a stakeholder in for since its inception. We have always tried to make sure that the project will align with our SEDS, which is really important. It's our roadmap for the region. Tech and telecom, which was our #1 goal in the last SEDS draft, which was the last 5 years, by building up a high-density infrastructure in a high-density mixed-use area, the development and the cost for developing broadband or connectivity lowers. The deployment costs lower, and that attracts remote workers. It also helps increase your online presence and the ability to be connected in a small space. Workforce, so the talent retention is our #1 goal as we are moving into the next 5 years. We're looking at how this particular project is going to bolster and support our goal of workforce, and it will create more jobs. If you're building up, you're building capacity and building the ability to have more opportunities in the job market. Goal #3 was just the infrastructure and land management. So vertical mixed use maximizes limited land, reduces sprawl, and ensures stability for transportation infrastructure. So when you bring, instead of being all spread out, you're bringing amenities, bringing housing options, bringing kind of your crux of a development into a smaller space. You're able to kind of increase the quality of living by being able to walk to a shorter walk along the river and access all of your services in an easier manner. Economic gardening, the ground floor retail spaces would serve as incubators and also be available for walking retail and supported by foot traffic and those that come to the facility or to come to the development. Instead of the Sterling Highway just being a pass-through, I think that it's going to be attractive for people to, it's going to be a destination where people stop. They get lunch, they shop, they spend time here. They also get the idea that maybe they could live there. They relocate here. It kind of can just start to catch on with people that are accessing this development. And then, of course, partnerships, which is our fifth goal in the current SEDS. Our coordination of industry and municipal and nonprofit efforts have always create economic value and economic viability as we move forward, because we're all literally on the same page, and we are all understanding the vision and the direction that Soldotna wants to go into. Just for a note, when we're looking at the 18-hour amenities here, those are those services, the restaurants, shops, retail spaces that aren't typically open 9 to 5. So they're open around the clock. So you're giving people access to a variety of places to shop, places to eat, places to be social, and to connect. Next page. So the 2021 through 2026 SEDS, those were our goals. As we're looking forward, we're in the draft right now. By the way, my plug is that our 30-day comment period is open. So please, there's a link at the top of your presentation here. But the next 5-year strategy is drafted, and we are seeing that housing availability is the #1 priority, concern, and issue for not just Soldotna, but for our entire region. What that means is the availability, the affordability, the accessibility are all factors when we're looking at things that are constraining our economic development and growth. And we want to close that gap. We want to understand what that means and understand what it means to maybe think outside the box and have higher density developments that have living spaces on top of retail spaces and be able to create more smaller footprint living spaces that are easily accessible and also affordable. We're looking at workforce development opportunities and labor force. We know that a lot of our population is either we're not growing in terms of our workforce. Our younger generations are leaving the state. We have some attrition, and we're trying to stop that. We're trying to make sure that our communities are providing everything that people need to live and work and thrive here. And that includes amenities, affordable housing, and access to jobs where they don't have to drive maybe 45 minutes or an hour to a commute, cutting that, making it easier for people to live, right? Also, our cost of living and our energy stability is rising to the top as focus areas. And when we're looking at trying to curb the cost of living, walkability and the standard of walkability in your community is a factor. People spend a lot of money on gas and cars, but if they don't have to, that's more money in their pocket, and they have more disposable income to contribute to the community if they don't have to drive so much. So a high-density mixed-use development addresses all three of our priorities that are for the future, and it lowers that per-unit energy cost because we would see these developments be built and created with high energy standards. They'd be more efficient. They'd be lower cost of living for the consumer. Next page, please, or next slide. So what the data says, when we're looking at, when I was talking with Linda about what kind of information is relevant and important and making sure that they hit them, we're talking about, you know, the value per acre and how to put a number on a value per acre in Soldotna. And while we don't have any studies Soldotna specific, I did go to case studies nationwide to see, you know, what the value per acre is in San Diego or Colorado or Idaho or Wyoming, a variety of different areas. And essentially, the standard unit is that with big box, single use commercial lots that have just one store on them, they're about $8,000 to $18,000 annually per acre. When we start looking at mixed use, which is 3 or 4 stories, and please keep in mind that it's not one size fits all for high density. So a high density in Baltimore is going to look completely different than high density in Soldotna. It's right size high density is what I like to say. Just like anything in Alaska, it has to make sense to where we are and what our developments look like, what our communities are made up of. But it's up to 10 times the value when you start building up. I read one study where if you imagined a table, so if you have a kitchen table and you have let's say you have all of these $1 bills and you ask your son to put the $1 bills all along the table and he spreads them out, and then you ask him to spread out another layer and another layer. If you're building up, you can put more dollars on the table versus if you spread out, they're going to start falling over. So essentially building up is going to increase your tax base exponentially. Where high density mixed use gives you a higher tax base, gives you higher per capita tax yield, but at the same time, it also increases your socioeconomic factors in the community by increasing your walkability, you're able to have a sense of community in a smaller high density development. And when we look at, I keep talking about walkability because it is very important, I think, in urban centers, and also just if people want to move here, they want to know what is the closest, what services are closest to their homes or wherever they're relocating. And when we talk about walk scores, a property value uplift, which is the $3,000, is the national average per 1 point walk score. It means that for every 1 point increase in a neighborhood's walk score, which is your measure of walkability to all of the amenities that you find important as a individual, the average home value will then increase by about $3,000. So not just the value is going to be happening with your high density development, those areas around you, those homes that are already existing will also be benefiting from a higher value on their property value. So when we make Soldotna more walkable through a mixed use development, the property values will go up, not just the ones on the riverfront proper, but all of those that are kind of as you move out.
Mr. Mayor, is it appropriate to ask questions as we go, or are we going to hold questions until the end? If you don't mind, just a quick question to clarify on the tax yield differentials there. Does that delineate between sales tax and property tax, or is that kind of a sum of both of those?
It's a sum of both of those.
Okay.
And it's hard with sales tax because everybody's rates are a little bit different, but it's an average of both of the tax that a municipality or a county would receive.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Carey?
Am I correct to assume, excuse me, am I correct to assume that as a professional, you deal with these things with frequency?
Yes, that's our job, is to dive into the details. Yes.
So I wanted, and I was on the Economic Development Board for a few years, ways back. Would you see as, from the standpoint of the city council, again, that's not totally your responsibility, that's much more mine, but that a factor, I'm going to say a driving factor of this is to produce more income for the city?
I wouldn't say it's the driving
I
factor.
didn't say the, I'm saying it is, but it is.
It is a factor, yes.
And so would it be correct to assume, and is it okay if I continue with it? Okay. So would it be correct to assume from the standpoint of the city that as we look at the timeline for this, part of our objective would be to see the effect on, and obviously increase, not decreasing, of revenue? That would be an appropriate thing for us to be considering.
Yes.
Okay. And there's many parts to that, but one, and it goes along very well with the question just asked. How do you factor in the value of the river that can be seen by people as compared to, and I have no doubt your data is accurate, but the idea that is, as you go up higher, the dollars stack up. On some level, is it reasonable to assume that there would be some dollars going down if view of the river is blocked? Now, I may not be asking the question correctly, but I hope you understand what I'm asking. Seeing the river seems to me a really important thing, even for people just driving through.
I completely agree.
And for the people that live here,
Mhm.
and again, wherever we walk and wherever we go. And so is there a way to equate the positiveness of going up with offering all kinds of services and those good quality things with the decrease if you block the river off?
Yes, I think that you need to put a value on that river, right? We know how valuable that river is for outdoor recreation, trail access, fishing access, beauty, right? It sets a scene for Soldotna, and there's an intrinsic value on that. when you're considering a high density, right? We're not going 60 stories up, right? When you
I
guys
hope
are
not.
talking about, right? We don't want that. And so putting that into your priorities when you're considering, you do want to do, consider high density, buildings and see what that looks like with making sure that the protection of the view of the experience of the river is also there. So those things could go together.
Just one more question, Mr. Mayor, if it's okay? And it goes with it. I'm of the premise, this is the single most important thing the city's doing, but it's on a long-term basis. That this could, I believe, easily be a 5 to 20-year process. Will you, as you continue to provide us with guidance and direction and ideas, and again, I like that we start off with a timeline, will you be able to recommend a timeline in terms of 5, 10, 15, 20 years in terms of what we need to have done? And what the question I'm asking you, if 3 years from now, there was virtually nothing more done, would we be setting this process behind? Or is it possible that just the dynamics of things are such that significant time needs to take place within these different periods of timelines? And again, I hope I'm making sense of what I'm saying. We're not like in a dire economic straits. It's not like we don't do this right now, the city's going to collapse. I think we got a great city, but certainly enhancing it is always part of it. And so that, will you be, or could you be assisting us in terms of developing what the timeline needs to be, particularly that we, the city, and I look at it as zoning stuff, zoning seems to be something, and the idea of roads and that, so that part of my question is, how much of this is really up to the city to decide versus other economic factors that, we simply have to facilitate? But this is not the city's project. We're not going to be building. And that may be a misstatement, and so correct me if I am, but anyway.
It is the city's project. In terms of consulting and providing input on timelines and milestones and goals set within those time zones or those milestones. I think, the Riverfront Committee, we've talked about the pieces to the puzzle, right? This needs to happen before this happens, and there is a timeline set. We have, I think, this is a significant piece of that, is to understanding how rezoning would help facilitate the success and the progress of this project. So I think the timeline is already there. It's just getting through some of these process elements to achieve the next thing and achieve the next thing. I know that the redevelopment committee, we've been talking about small wins, right? Small successes, not just, bulldozing the entire area and building something beautiful. Like that's not reasonable. But doing small wins to show that redevelopment can happen in small increments, and it is the right size for Soldotna. And I think that is being done and considered and discussed and made a point of, to make sure that it's done in a timeline that is reasonable and also comfortable for Soldotna. And yes, it isn't all about the dollar signs, in my opinion. To me, this is about creating something that can meet the needs of Soldotna and the greater surrounding areas, such as housing, such as creating increased connectivity, so remote workers are having a place that they're attracted to come to live and work here, and then building those amenities out within them so it's not traffic gridlock. You have a walkable, usable pathway to get to your grocery store, to get to your coffee shop, to get to your go meet your friends or whatever that looks like. So to answer to your question, yes, there's a timeline. We are talking about the timeline, but it is the city's project. I'm a mere helper and supporter.
Would you see
Ms. Bauer?
potentially a bond issue involved in this for the city?
I can't speak to that.
Okay.
I can't speak to that because
In your
I don't know
discussion,
what's that?
So in your discussion, the idea of raising money through a bond issue for certain development. is-
Not
that
on
has
my
been
end.
discussed.
I don't
Thank
think
you.
we're at that point. We're just looking at a
Guess we'll see it in
rezone.
the Plan, if that's. part
Right.
of it.
Ms. Bauer, go ahead.
A couple of things, and thank you for expanding on, and I think she touched on one thing that I wanted to touch on is, yes, there would be revenue. We receive revenue through sales tax for the city, but you know, the most of the focus of the plan involves quality of life, which again, I guess, you know, it does, that affects sales tax. So, you know, there's that element of it, but the plan really is about quality of life in Soldotna. As far as, and Cassidy is on our on our working group, and I think we have a meeting coming up next month sometime,
Yeah,
but
Stephanie.
as far as, you know, established timeframes, it is some of it based on opportunity and the next steps. You know, the next step is then rezone of some sorts. And I know that, you know, the height has come up several times, and
Mhm.
understandably, because we don't want to block the view of the river.
Right.
And so those discussions, you know, we're having right now, there can be 48 feet right now. So, you know, that's why we want to work through some of these elements. But I just really want to, you know, talk about the quality of life rather than the financial part of it. As far as the bond, we're not there. We're not there for any of that. We don't have a project identified for a bond. We're not there.
Anybody else?
Okay, let me see. I know I'm probably going over my time. Next slide. I do want to bring to your attention that there are these real live places in Alaska that this is already happening. The Mountain View Village in Anchorage was just on the image on your left-hand side. This was in 2000 and I don't know, I do have my glasses. 2004, and then 10 years later, they enhanced that existing footprint and that existing building, but built in multiple residential units as well as some amenities around it. I think there's a park there, and it increased property value, but it also just increased opportunities for people to live in communities within this neighborhood. So instead of having a building, say, be vacant or dilapidated, taking your existing infrastructure and investing in it and renovating it is just a great use of space. And it's also a great creator of opportunities. There's also Discovery Park, which created 191 units. It's a mixed housing model. And then Hollybrook Terrace, which I know is in Anchorage, and I cannot place what side of town that is on. But they took an existing building and built up onto it and created some infill design that is beautiful, and it creates residential opportunities for them. So again, by taking existing infrastructure or doing a high density, I do want to say that it is more affordable when you're developing that. The infrastructure costs for utilities, water and sewer, roads, sometimes water and sewer is already there. You just have to retrofit it to make it more beneficial for the size that you're building. But it seems to be 10 to 40% per capita lower infrastructure cost-wise when you're building that out rather than doing a new build or a sprawl build. Next slide. There we go. And this is a Riverwalk in San Diego, which I just love because it shows, you just shows a connected community within a existing older building. The older building here was built in 1938, I believe. It was an old factory. They renovated it and built some residential apartments and housing units above. And then all along the bottom are retail spaces and service spaces. And then you have that open air area. But what this does is it creates kind of a community within your community, right? You have a social gathering spot. You have a place where you can listen to music or you can, go see your friends, you go get a bite to eat, and it's all very closely located. So it creates a commercial synergy when you're concentrating that activity, and it creates that destination rather than just that drive-through corridor, which I think sometimes we feel like Soldotna does just become that drive-through corridor, especially in the summertime. It creates some housing diversity that is much needed in Soldotna, and it also looks at the river as its key as a key convener, right? The river, people go to the water, people go to that river just to stand by the river, and they enjoy the river. And so making that part of this vision is very important, and making sure that the Kenai River is not forgotten, but part of that economic engine that is part of this planning. And I think that's it. So next slide. These are some great resources. There's some great case studies here throughout the country. There's Wyoming, Colorado. There's some smaller rural communities that have done right-sized, high-density developments. But people are really starting to understand the value of taking a building or building a high-density multi-use facility and the benefits for their community. Not just the dollar signs. I don't think that if you make decisions based on dollar signs, it's going to get you very far. I think if you make sure that you're thinking about the quality of life that you want in Soldotna, the values that Soldotna has, and the importance of the sense of community that you guys have, that is what should drive these decisions. And that's all I have this evening. Thank you for having me.
Any questions from the council? Seeing none, thank you very much for the presentation. We'll move it on to Ms. Mitchell.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Cassidy, for the presentation. Wait for John to pull up the presentation. So my presentation is really, all the slides on this presentation is on the 11 by 17 sheet that you have in front of you, so you can see it in detail. The way that I decided to go about this work session is to really give you the tools to understand how planning and zoning works, on how your decisions are affected. What does it mean by shifting from permitted to prohibited? Why do we put a certain use as permitted versus conditional? What does that process entail, so that you better understand the effects of it? And one of the big concerns that your council had was the non-conforming status. And so I created a map for this discussion, and I think it's important too, but I'll first start off. Can we switch the slide, please? How the timeline is important to just give a brief overview of when this Riverfront mixed use started. Was January 2025. This doesn't really cover probably the commercial corridor that was started back in 2022 by the previous planning director, and it got to the point where your council got a work session on it in January 2023 and actually got the green light to actually proceed with that commercial corridor. And this Riverfront mixed use is actually very similar to it. If anything, it actually has fewer non-conforming uses than what is presented in the RMU district. And so this chart that Laura created for me. It's very handy because it shows you how many times that we put it out there for public process, for notices, for opportunities to receive comments. As you can see in the mic with the black icon and the green circle, is when property owners or tenants receive a notice. Because the way we sent out notice for this one is we went ahead and just sent it out to all the property owners according to their address with the assessors. On top of that, we went ahead and sent a notice to all the physical addresses. Even though we got a lot of return mailers, we wanted to ensure that we covered our bases here. Even though the zoning code itself doesn't require us to send a notice on a major boundary adjustment, we're being proactive in our efforts, and we have it on a projects page. We've had local media coverage. So there's been many opportunities to get public comments. And so far, I think we received a handful in terms of written comments on this project. Before I move on to this, if there's any question, I wanted this to be a discussion and to be able to address any of your concern, because I know at the last meeting, it was very clear that you wanted to be clear on this process and the effects of it, to be comfortable with your decision to move forward with this. And that's my hope, is to address a lot of those concerns.
Mr. Nelson, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Could you maybe going a little bit off what Mr. Carey said, because I know I have a number in my head, so I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. So when we look at the timeline going forward, so let's just say, for example, at our next meeting, this is enacted and off we go to the races. So obviously there's a lot to be done, but what is administration's picture on, let's just say, when some of this is actually developed? Is this a 10-year plan, a 50-year plan, a 100-year plan? Could you maybe talk a little bit about what assumption you've been working off of? Or I don't know if that's the right way to phrase the question, but I think you see where I'm getting at.
So in terms of time frame, I think the rezone is important because it gives that assurance, and I think the plan talks about it too. If I can quote it, it says, updates, amendments, or creating new codes and development standards are time-sensitive measures necessary to ensure future development meets the intent, but also ensures quality development and provides certainty to private developers. Do I have a project, and I think you asked this question in the last meeting, that's in line or in the queue? No, but I think it's an opportunity to say, hey, this has been rezoned to this, and for marketing purposes, I think it shifts the audience or potential developers. I have received calls about like, hey, is this moving forward? Because there are some interest, but to what extent, are they going to invest the next day and the next year? I don't know with certainty, but I do know I find value in the rezone. It gives assurance of, hey, we won't see a storage yard next to us. Hey, the setbacks are a certain way, or building heights. So those standards are important for discussions for the public to know. Right now, the commercial corridor, you can do anything almost. It's too broad. And so I think honing in a little bit to some extent will be helpful.
If I can follow up,
Bauer?
or I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay,
So,
go ahead.
and I understand that, and I would agree that as a body, if we don't put these next steps into effect, then nobody is going to invest in this potential project. And I guess really where I was getting at, this may be a question more for Ms. Bauer, but in the plan, one example was given was a 20-year business case or build-out case. So let's just say, for example, at a very, very hypothetical, that the city decided that we were going to go out and we were going to start this process by building X, Y, and Z. So ignore all the other factors. I'm kind of trying to get to, in my head, is 20 years from now something we're sort of thinking of? More, less? Of course, we're not chiseling this in stone, but I guess to simplify my question, that's what I'm asking.
Ms.
me.
Bauer?
I do believe it is a 20-year project, and I do want to kind of qualify that a little bit. It's based on opportunity. So if we, have a developer or a current property owner, for that matter, anyone who wants to begin working on a portion of the project on their property or potential property, we will start working with them. So it really is based on opportunity, but I still believe 20 years is the right I would say, the right amount, but that could change, really. It's really based on the opportunity. It's also based on opportunity for funding on our side. We intend on seeking funding for the water sewer portion of the project. Still have work to do on our side to identify what that would look like as far as funding potential, but 20 years, I would say that.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
Continue.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So I just want to refresh your memory of the boundaries of this focus of the riverfront mixed use of this ordinance is to only provide standards within the yellow area, which was the reduced rezone area that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommended for approval for your council to consider. Next slide. So when it comes to land use, this land use table, and I think the concern of uses that are potentially changing or being prohibited, it's a criteria that as staff looking at, there's 3 criteria that can change the direction of where to lean towards, whether it's vision alignment, does it perfectly align with the mixed use walkable, then it should be a permitted use. If it mostly aligns but has certain impacts, then it should be conditional to put them through the conditional use permit. No guarantee unless we can mitigate those impacts. And then prohibited if it really conflicts with the intent and vision of this area. And then it talks on to about neighborhood impacts and mitigation needs. So this is the criteria that we're looking for if you're to ask yourself as we go through the land use table, where does this fit? How do you see this use? This is the table to help guide you to, well, should it be permitted by right, conditional use, and prohibited? So I wanted to at least frame that to help you in your decision making. And next slide. I know a lot of the concern is about the non-conforming aspect. And can we actually go to the next slide, actually, please? Is the status of the land use status. Should this move forward? What are the effects to the existing properties? And so I created this map. And what you see in green is the existing use is permitted. With the RMU rezone, there's no change or impact to it. They could continue as is and continue to expand. There's only really one yellow, and sorry for the not as drastic change, is you see higher top, the long rectangular is non-conforming conditional. So that's a use today that requires a conditional use permit because it's an apartment complex. Even under the current commercial zone, that's a conditional use. So nothing's really changed for that parcel too. And then everything you see closer to the bridge, that's kind of in orange, that would be changed to prohibited, meaning they can expand under the RMU rezone. However, under today's commercial zoning, they're all conditional. So even if they wanted to expand, they're considered non-conforming. They would have to go through a conditional use permit because dwellings, a single family, the existing duplex, the community residence, the Aspen Creek, and the River Terrace RV Park, they're all non-conforming to code. Either they have a conditional use or they don't because they existed prior to the ordinance. And so they're all either subject to conditional use or the non-conforming use today. So are they really affected? The way they're affected is with the RMU, they just can't expand. Right now, under today's code, they could expand either through a conditional use permit or actually they all can expand today with a conditional use permit. So I just wanted to be clear on the effects of it. The ones that will be most impacted are the ones you see in orange closest to the bridge. And I wanted to point out the other 2, the ones closer to the top to the park is also in orange. That is the auto repair shop and the retail shop and the gas station. They are going to be prohibited under the RMU. Right now they're permitted. And so they can no longer expand. But I also would encourage you to look at the existing lot. Could they actually even expand in their current footprint, in their current capacity or lot? Aspen Creek already got their CUP to expand to create another wing. I don't see the capacity to expand any further with the parking requirement. And the single family and the duplex, again, dwellings are mostly in low density. It's not really something that, even if we went through the conditional use permit today, that's something that commission has seen to support because it's a low density in a commercial high impact use. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of impact to that existing use surrounded by commercial. And then the community residents, sure, they could expand. So that's another thing to consider is with the existing lots, with the existing use, where do you want to see them? Do we see them being able to expand? And if so, potentially that could be a conditional use permit. But the question is, what impacts are we trying to mitigate if we put them through a conditional use permit process? I know I'm throwing a lot of jargon, but if you have any questions, I do want to address these non-conforming status because I know that's a concern of what are the effects of this on existing businesses. And so, and everything in brown is vacant lots or vacant business or tenants.
Mr. Chilson?
Question on the limitation to expand for non-conforming prohibited. Does that only apply to fixed permanent structures? Or, the example I'm thinking of is like an RV park. Like maybe he has an office building that he's not going to expand, but maybe there's a large tract of land that hasn't really been used, but it's cleared. And, maybe this season I'm going to allow 20 more RVs to park there. Does that constitute an expansion since he's not building anything? He's just letting more people park in the flat lot that's just hasn't been used historically, but it's still there. The development status hasn't changed.
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Chelson. So there's actually three types of nonconformity. There's use, meaning maybe a use that doesn't require a building. In that sense, maybe a storage yard or an RV park, or nonconforming structure, which the building itself is the use, and there's nonconforming lot, but that doesn't really apply here. So in your question regarding the RVs, it would be considered an expansion if the space that wasn't previously used for the RV was never used. It was vacant for a different use. So in essence, the portion where maybe vacant now, if they were to expand the RV, add more RVs into that space, it's considered expansion. Because the original part that was grandfathered in was where I think primarily along the river that was existent prior to the zoning ordinance. That's the portion that's grandfathered in. So any expansion beyond that would require today a conditional use, but under the RMU would be prohibited since we're proposing that campgrounds, which includes RV parks, would be a prohibited use.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions? Ms. Hutchinson?
Thank you, Mayor. So the question I have is, you have Speedway and Napa as non-conforming. Those are huge impacts to our sales tax. That is how this city takes care of itself, the sales tax. And I'm concerned. I know you say it's grandfathered, but there's always things that can happen. And I just don't want us to lose that income for the city. And in additional, I see that you have Buckholz as permitted, but let's say they decide they want to become an assisted living facility. You're going to say, no, they can't do that with their property. Is that correct?
Under the proposed RMU, yes, because
Okay. As well as Odie's, which is now closed, and if a veterinarian wants to move in there, they're not going to be able to. Is that correct?
well, there's that time frame of abandonment. So the key term here is discontinue, and I wrote it in the ordinance or in your, and I'm trying to find it. The key term is if a use is and this is on the box under non-conforming status, the existing under, and can we go to slide back, Johnny? So the last row there, abandonment, rights lost, either prohibited or conditional use. So the use is discontinued, destroyed, or abandoned for a period of 1 year or superseded by non-conforming use. It cannot be restarted. So I want to be clear that there is a time frame of 1 year, but the key term is also abandonment. What does that look like? I think it leaves room to say, I mean, if you're having electricity or you're marketing it with the intent to continue that use, I think there is obviously the code probably needs to be more clear on what that means. And again, part of this Riverfront mixed use, I'm on behalf of staff has always said we would probably need to refine our non-conforming use to be very clear and probably extend the 12-year because it's not realistic for our climate.
Well, I guess what I'm just looking at is they have decided to market this property because it's no longer going to be a restaurant. And it is privately owned by somebody that was not in the restaurant. So therefore, they had been in discussions about a veterinary clinic. But in your list, veterinary are not allowed. So that, in other words, that owner has no control over who they want to sell it to, because unless it conforms to your list. Is that correct?
If the code moves forward with what's proposed by staff, that a veterinary clinic is prohibited, yes, they would not be able to do so.
Thank you.
Mr. Nelson.
Thank you, Mayor. And this is a subject that I've been very concerned about, and I appreciate, Ms. Miller, that we've been emailing back and forth here, and I appreciate that information. So I just wanted to let my colleagues here on the council know that since we came up on the abandonment subject in that 12 months, that was one of the things I felt very uncomfortable with. And Ms. Mitchell mentioned potentially refining that code. And although I haven't sat down and we haven't had face-to-face discussions, I did just want to let folks know that I may be trying to sponsor an ordinance to do that, just exactly that, because I feel even though there's not too many uses, it's not a fair thing to try and have a business turn on a dime. And a year could be a dime when you're talking about architectural drawings for expansion or remodel or trying to get the supply chain in here. So, and that's part of the reason I started off this comment with what is our actual time frame, because we have this vision. I think the vision is great. I don't agree with all of it, but I agree with most of it. And I think we'll figure it out as we go. But we also don't want to alienate the people that are there in that district as well. So just for clarity, I wanted to let the council know that we've had some of these discussions and that might be something I'm moving forward with.
Any other questions? Continue on then, Ms. Mitchell.
Thank you. So since this table is up, I do want to go through it so that you understand if a use becomes non-conforming status due to this rezone, what does it look like? If it changed to prohibited, where maybe it's allowed today, permitted, or conditional, that first column to the center column, going through, can they continue their current use? Yes, they can. Can they sell the business? Yes, a right stays with the land, allowing a new owner to continue. And this is even if we put prohibited for the use. Expansion of use, unfortunately, is strictly prohibited if we do choose to prohibit a use. Structural enlargement or expansion, no, it's not allowed. You cannot expand the square footage or the footprint. Again, talking about prohibited use. Repair and maintenance, absolutely. We want you to maintain your building, so it's allowed. When it comes to casualty loss, like damage beyond your own fault, it's permitted. You can rebuild, and this probably will be a code cleanup unless the extent exceeds 50% replacement. That's probably a possible amendment. And then in terms of abandonment, again, rights loss. Yes, if the use is discontinued, and this is the current ordinance as written, destroyed or abandoned for a period of 1 year or superseded, it cannot be restarted. However, if a use in the proposed RMU is designated C, which is conditional, and becomes non-conforming, the current use can continue. Transferable in terms of the title, same. You can continue. You inherit the same rights and status. When it comes to expanding or extending the use, when it's conditional, you do so through a CUP as the code is written. So if you have a new building or you have an addition, you have to go through a conditional use permit. Repair and maintenance, it's allowed. Ordinary maintenance, we want that. And the same thing when it comes to casualty loss, whether it's prohibited or conditional, if it's a non-conforming status, you can rebuild it and to the extent of 50% of the replacement value. And again, rights, same thing, it falls for prohibited and conditional. They're held to the same thing as if they discontinue or destroyed or abandoned for a period of 1 year. So.
Question on the property action on selling the business. To Councilman Nelson's point earlier about abandonment. So changing up a business or transferring ownership can take time. And let's say it's a larger business, some of those can be on the market for more than 12 months. So if something's on the market for 24 months, does that count as abandoned? Or if the intent remains to operate the business just under a new owner and it just takes maybe 2 years to sell, does that count towards abandonment? Abandonment as the code would be currently proposed before us.
Thank you, Councilor Chelson. So that is a great question. I think it's discretion, and in my opinion of abandonment, that would not be, because you're marking with the intent for that use to
Okay.
continue. Like I would even say if you kept your electricity of something, you're kind of keeping it operating. You're not completely abandoning and saying, walking away, I don't want anything to do with it. I would even say that's even proof that there is intent there.
So I would agree that there's probably some opportunity to clean up the code then to just really clarify with certainty in the language that selling the business, no matter how long it takes, if the intent is there to operate under a new owner, would not count towards abandonment. The other thing that really gives me pause on this is the casualty loss. I absolutely understand the intent that with establishing this new zoning district, you're trying to gradually transition it to operating as, again, a walkable, shoppable district that kind of aligns with the goals of the prohibited and permitted uses that we see defined before us. But it makes me deeply uncomfortable with the idea that, you know, you could have a business owner that's invested just a tremendous amount of time and effort and just self-sacrifice and trying to establish a business in a community they call home that might not necessarily be aligned with what we're trying to do, but is grandfathered in. And let's say that just burns to the ground and we're going to tell them, sorry, you can't rebuild it, even though your insurance is willing to cut you a check and go do it. We won't let you. Like, that just doesn't seem right to me. So I would want to see that changed, and I potentially be willing to sponsor a amendment to do that. So
Thank you for that. Again, most of this language is probably when the ordinance was written in and repealed back in the 90s, late 80s. And so I agree with you from a staff's perspective. What I've seen, and typically in the past, is there's always this threshold. You know, some people say foundation, up to the foundation, but I agree with you. If it's, you know, something that you didn't cause out of your own hands, I agree that it should be allowed to be rebuilt. Absolutely.
okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor Parker.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. I wanted to say I had the same concerns as Councilmember Chilson on the casualty and loss. And, you know, I go back and remember when Prosos burned down. And they ended up rebuilding, and I don't know if they had to stick within this 50% replacement value at the time or not, but, you know, they rebuilt a very nice place, and I have concerns with what we've got right there right now. With respect to structural enlargement, repair, and maintenance, if I own a structure, and I just want to redo the interior, I'm doing nothing to change the size, or anything for the outside, but I want to redo all the inside. Is that going to be prohibited?
Thank you, Vice Mayor Parker. That's actually a really good question. So I think a good example would be the Napa Auto Repair and Retail Store. So if they were to do interior repair and expand the auto repair, if that's prohibited, then that's not okay. But if they're repairing, well, actually, let me think about this. If it's interior, no, it's not really considering expansion of use because you're not really expanding the footprint. You're not extending anything. It's within the realm unless, you know, the question is if it's the same use. If you're changing the use, the question is what is the new use if you decide to split a tenant suite into two and you proposing something else. It just, the scenario is more specific details, but generally, if the use overall remains the same, you can do whatever configuration of interior. Zoning doesn't even look at interior remodel when it goes through it. It just goes through a building permit if there's any structural changes or electrical, plumbing, mechanical.
Continue.
Thank you. So a little short on time. We'll go ahead and skip to the next one. You know, a lot of the questions about the development standards. Why are they important? Because it's the how this creates the physical feel of what we're envisioning of the use within this corridor. So setback and coverage today under the existing code, There's nothing. It's just guided by the parking and loading and landscaping and fire code requirements. So when we talk about setbacks, today's commercial corridor is 0. Within the proposed RMU, it's 0 again. So we're not requiring any minimum setbacks unless it's governed by parking, landscaping, or fire code. Existing code, and it's to remain with the proposed RMU, 48 feet. We kept it at 48 because I think there's more time that staff needs to really evaluate what 48 or lower height is, because current standards already allows people to build up to 48. Nothing has changed there, and we wanted to keep it the same rather than reduce it. And, you know, as mentioned, vertical development and higher density requires additional height. So we wanted to keep it there with the intent that staff would come back and really assess what is an appropriate height. And maybe in terms of protecting views, we tier it. But I think that takes a lot of time to look into before we just reduce it blindly. And so nothing has changed in terms of the building height with the current zone and the proposed zone. And when it comes to landscaping, it's still subject to the same standards as the current commercial district. Nothing's changed there. And then furthermore, in the general standards, and you have a handout sheet in front of you with general standards so that you have the ordinance, proposed ordinance in front of you, is general standards with the reduced parking. I know that has been a concern of it substantially reduces a lot. So in the sheet in front of you, at the top, it starts with general standards, section E. And as you go further to section F, the first section, subsection F1, minimum number of parking spaces. You know, these are just proposal of minimums. And this is strictly what the box you see is for the RMU district. This is not for the citywide. I just want to be clear on that, and that it's minimum. The intent we followed is what was written in the plan, and we can keep it the same if that's what you're more comfortable with. That's okay. This is what was proposed in the Riverfront plan, and that's what staff went by, because we just didn't want to see requiring a higher minimum that we're going to see more asphalts of parking, and that's something that's harder to change. And sometimes parking is an issue with development. I've had people come in and say they don't have enough parking. And what ends up happening is they have to go through a process with the variance to ask for reduced parking. So when we start asking for a higher minimum, we're telling them we have flexibility, go through this other process when I've seen all the variance of parking reduction has been approved. And a good example is the field house. We went a variance for the parking reduction for that space. So minimum parking requirement, you know, really does affect the outcome of a project, because you're saying you need to build out this many because we're asking you of a higher minimum. Again, this is minimum. If they want to build more, they can. We're not saying you have a restriction on the maximum. So I want to be hopefully very transparent on that table. And I'm happy to answer any questions your council may have on that.
Mr. Nelson?
And I would just, if I could go back to height on these standards real quick, because I know that is something, and I'm going to apologize for this off-the-wall question, but I was on P&Z and I recall voting on a variance for the river tower at the hospital, and I cannot pull that packet up for the life of me, probably my computer. Do you know how tall that river tower is? I'm trying to picture 48 feet in my head, and this is kind of where I'm getting at.
You know, I tried to look it up myself and I couldn't find it. I probably should have asked Johnny for help to look for it. But yes, I would say it's at least
It's
30.
with a and a basement,
Yep.
but yeah, it might be below grade.
But we measure from grade to, the tallest part. So it's close.
We can find it. I was just trying to do a visual so we don't have to derail this too much. Thank you, though.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so just continuing on, if no one else has questions, surface, you know, these are general standards that I provided based on what's in the plan and trying to maintain an aesthetics. And of course, we can default to the commercial corridor, which is nothing. These are new standards that doesn't exist within the code. So first one, surface parking location, you know, having it located behind or besides the building. Otherwise, we get all we see is parking lot first before we see the entryway of a building. I think that is kind of consistent with the vision of the riverfront design. On-street credit, that's there. It's just if they need to provide parking and they can't provide it, or we don't want a big asphalt on the premise, we're giving them an opportunity to get credit for their off-street parking requirement if and when there's parking elsewhere. So we're trying to think ahead. And then off-site parking, again, if we were to ever have maybe someone near the Davis block and that becomes a parking lot, or the Aspen Creek businesses within there, and they need to meet their minimum parking requirement, they could use that according to the way this is written. That off-site parking could be giving them credit to their use. And then driveway and curb cuts, we just want to be clear, one per street frontage, because we don't want to see so many curb cuts, because that really affects the walkability of an area. And then something that I've heard since I've been here is trash receptacles. I thought we had something in code that it needs to be screened, but it's not. It's something that has been practiced, but it's not codified anywhere. So this intent is just really protecting the aesthetics of the area. Other than that, this is the general standards that is before you within the RMU, and any of these standards could be refined, removed, postponed, added at a later date, removed. So any questions by your council? Okay, could we go ahead and go to the next slide? Exceptions. One of the questions that was brought forward by your council is, well, how rigid are these rules? So when it comes to the zoning code, there are a few ways to get exceptions or variance or relief from what appears to be a strict standard. So in the code itself, we have an administrative modification waiver that allows staff to modify certain criteria. In this case, all those general standards that was presented to you can be modified through an administrative waiver, up to 10%, because obviously anything more substantial than that should go to the Planning and Zoning Commission. And obviously, if it's beyond that, it requires a code amendment, whether it's a text amendment, a map amendment, will go before your council. If the standard doesn't work out, we can always change the code. And so you got those three processes: administrative waiver, as staff to decide, variance by the Planning and Zoning Commission, and any kind of code amendment would be up to your council to decide. And then I just wanted to provide, like, in terms of time frame, just for general public to understand how does this work, administrative, no public hearing, time frame, because these are things we need to consider when we put people through processes. What does it look like? It's easy to say, go ahead and do a variance, but it takes time. So it's really important to consider, is a variance the right way, or we modify our ordinance to put proper thresholds and standards or parameters. Next slide. Oh. And really, if I had more time, I really wanted to go through the land use table because I think that's important. But I gave you the tools to see the effects of it by using the criteria of the land use designation, the criteria, and going through this list to let staff know where you stand on it. Because like I had mentioned to your council, the way I drafted this is I use what the effort of previous staff, the commercial corridor, brought this forward, along with incorporating the Riverfront development mixed use draft zoning district into the two. I didn't want to, the path was paved already, and I was thinking I was just taking it to the end to get us to an ordinance. So, that's where I was at. I wasn't part of that early discussion. And so I'm just hoping that what was brought forth to your council and Planning and Zoning Commission through the commercial corridor still stands. And if not, maybe we really relook at the land use table using this criteria to guide us and to refine it. And that's all I have for your council. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any further questions from the council? Mr. Chilson.
I would just like to say thank you for the work that went into compiling all this information for our presentation this evening. This was highly informative and is going to be helpful for us as we move forward into the actual hearing and make our decisions on this. There's certainly some things I think need to be fixed or can stand to be improved upon, but overall, I think there's a lot of very good potential for our community here, and I'm very excited to see this move forward. I know there's been a tremendous amount of work from our team just getting it to this point. So I just want to say thank you for that.
Anyone else? Ms. Mauer, you have anything you'd like to add?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would ask, as you, digest this information, have more questions, please reach out to us. And then I'm sure someone has an amendment. So, and we want to help with that. As far as, obviously, our clerk would like to have it drafted, but we also want to make sure how it fits in with the ordinance itself, the current code. Is there another place that, say, I'm going to pick on Councilmember Chilson, say that Councilmember Chilson has an amendment for this one specific area, should there be another area that's amended as well? So we want to be able to work with you to make sure that the amendment does what's the intention, what you are intending with that amendment. So please reach out to us.
Anything else from anyone? Vice Mayor Porker.
Thank you. So it's been 6 months since we postponed any action on this proposed ordinance. What sort of outreach has there been from the community to the administration in terms of comments, concerns about this proposed ordinance? I see all the comments and engagement there was with media from February through September, but then from September going forward, and I know that you've been busy, Linda, but what sort of outreach has there been from the public to us? Comments, engagement, concern?
I know there was one email that was received late this afternoon.
Yeah, I got that.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for that question, Vice Mayor Parker. So in terms of being proactive and saying, did I reach out to him during? Yes, I was on leave. However, all these postcards that we've sent, it refers the property owner and the tenant back to our project website, which I kept current. That tells you about upcoming work sessions and even packet deadline comments to be included in the packet. And so that has been an ongoing space. You know, every time I sent these postcards, I get maybe one call, just like what you got today. Those postcards, I wish I had an example. I have it at my desk because I send it to myself to make sure that it's actually sent and received. And every time when you postpone, I send a new one saying it's been postponed. Here's the dates. Here's the QR code to bring us back to the project website for all the information and the link. Unfortunately, and that was actually one of my, thank you for bringing that up, is like, what does council would like to see from staff beyond that effort? We have a projects page, we send out notices. I'm not sure if an open house at this point would serve any more than what we've already done. I think if people were so concerned, I would hope that they had reached out to me. And when there was, I think, a couple last week or week before, I think there was something on social media about the Riverfront stuff that I got a lot of calls, but nothing that held true. And so once I clarified that, I think we're back to where we are right now, where we're not getting many comments back. You know, I think at this point, unless you would like staff to cold call each individual property owner and say we spoke to each one, that is the only step that I see. For the most part, I have talked to a lot of the property owners. I have talked to Aspen Creek. I have talked to River Terrace regarding the RV park. I've talked to certain businesses, probably at least I feel comfortable saying more than a third, up to 50% of property owners at the open house. I talked to Blazy Mall owners. I talked to, I can't even remember. I even talked to the gas station, the people who worked there, because when I was doing the signage for the summer, I had to reach out to the new owner. You know, I always ask the question, hey, what are your thoughts? Even with the email that you got today from Phil, he called, I talked, and I asked the question, what are your concerns? I always take the opportunity if they're willing to reach out to me to ask them, what do you know about it? To one, correct the information that's being put out there, and two, if there's something that I can address and bring forth and change, I'm willing to, because I do want to make note that after the open house, there were some concerns about the height. There were some concerns about the parking, and staff has made minor adjustments to it based on those comments. So we're not, I would need to know these things in order to bring forth further change at this point from the community.
Would you like to add anything more to that, Ms. Mahler?
I just wanted to say that we have had comments. There haven't been a great deal of comments. And as Linda stated, every time one is received, she does reach out and speak to them so that the questions can be answered. And some of it, the calls that came after the social media posts were really following up with the correct information. Those were, we handled those calls that way.
Go ahead, Vice Mayor Porter.
Thank you. I know there was a story a couple of weeks ago that had some misinformation and thought we were going to be having voting 2 weeks ago on the proposed ordinance, and glad that got fixed. But so did you send out postcards recently?
Yes.
Okay. And I know that Councilmember Carey back in September was concerned about public's involvement, their comments, making sure that items had been addressed, taken care of. And I just, like I said, I didn't see anything in the last 6 months, so I wanted to get a better feel for what type of engagement and what type of feedback are we getting. So thank you for addressing that.
Mr. Carey.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate the work that has been done and is going to be done. When I hear you mention the statement, if they were so concerned, they would call. I believe that that focus was particularly on the individuals within this zone, because that's the ones you've been sending to. And so I absolutely understand. However, I think since we talked about quality, which is for all the region, it's not simply for the people that live there, that's a much more difficult thing to do. And for all of us, again, everyone in this room probably in different ways, that deal with public activity, it is, I don't find it a good assumption that if you don't hear anything, that means everyone's happy. In our society today, I'll have to say my assumption would be probably most people start off unhappy, and you got to do everything you can just to maybe get them to budge toward being happier. And so that, part of my consideration of moving forward is to get a sense, do I feel the people, and I'm going to say the people in Soldotna, because that's who I represent, want this? Okay. I definitely, and I get out among people, I'm not seeing people strongly talking about, oh, this is, what I hear is the great, huge improvement that was made with the DOT land, making it into, again, that great space and the kiddie park and all that. What I hear is about the parking. A wonderful, wonderful, wonderful thing we've done. But now we need to finish it so people can park. That to me is a much higher priority. Second, what I hear about is what used to be the old trailer, or what the trailer park area, doing something about that. So on one end, and I see we've dropped that out of here for good reason, but again, it's not finished. We've got to get the parking, and on the other, and so that my concern is having a sense that we're moving ahead with what citizens of Soldotna want. I'm not sure people want to see a whole lot more people coming to town during the summer, just because we've got some big high buildings that they can't really park to because there's not much more parking for there, because we don't want it to be covered with concrete. And so that I'm not at all ready to move forward towards saying, let's just invite everyone, because that's what Soldotna is. I'm real clear. I really like Soldotna. And there's room for that. There's always room for improvement, but, and these things make a lot of sense in our mind thinking, but I don't get a sense, with the exception of the parking. That's a huge issue for many businesses, and the eyesore, which is the old trailer park. I don't see people jumping up and down and saying, do this. And I just want to add one more thing. When I mentioned bond, see, I was thinking in terms of water and sewer bond, that to me. And so I think a bond issue is part of the discussion of this. Okay, that's one way to do it. So no, I hope we're not gonna do a couple $100 million bond to build all these structures here. But anyway, I greatly appreciate the work we're doing, and I'm not ready to vote in favor of moving ahead on this at this time.
Ms. Hutchinson.
Till next week.
In
I
reference
know
to
that, but I'm
parking,
saying-
I seem to get the brunt of it all summer long because people don't have places to park in the park at this time. It's overrun every year. Every Wednesday, I hate Wednesday, I'll be honest with you, because I've got rentals that my tenants need to be able to park. Their customers need to be able to park. And so I feel like a warden every Wednesday, people flipping me off, calling me names because they can't park in my parking lot. And it is terrible. Even across the street, I see it where Thompson's Log is. I mean, they're always chasing people out of there. They're chasing people out of North Country Fair. It is horrendous. We've got that piece of property down there adjacent to the park. We need to do something with it and maybe alleviate this parking issue. But it's awful. I mean, absolutely awful.
Okay, I'm going to close this work session at this time. It's 5:50. I wouldn't mention that this is up for, these two ordinances are up for a public hearing, next meeting on February